All right, so this is the second part of section 4. We are dividing rational expressions now, so it's really similar to multiplying. We just add an extra step, so this should be a nice review. Okay, so first off, everything you should always do when you're doing this chapter is factor first. So that's what we're going to do again. Step 2, you're going to have to flip the second fraction because we want to basically multiply by the reciprocal. So I'm just going to put parentheses under it, multiply by reciprocal. And then 3 we're going to multiply straight across. And then, of course, we're going to simplify. Okay. So let's just do a little baby example here. So if I have like 2 ninths, and I could be dividing like this as 4/3. It could also be written as 2 ninths over 4/3. They are still the exact same thing. We're dividing 2 ninths by 4/3. Okay, so either way, however you look at it, I guess in the second way with this weird fraction and a fraction, it makes better sense to think of it as like multiplying by the reciprocal to the top and bottom. Right, so then the entire denominator, the 4's cancel, the 3's cancel. So I don't have that anymore. I just have 2 ninths times 3/4, which then we can multiply straight across if we want to and get 6 over 36, which is 1/6. The same thing is true for the first example with the division sign. You could flip the fraction as 2 ninths, and you always flip the second one and make it 3/4, which then you still get 1/6 once you multiply straight across and simplify. Okay, so it doesn't matter how you write it, you're still flipping the second fraction in our case, and you still get the same answer. Okay, but that was just with numbers, which we should already know how to do. Now we have all of these variables and expressions, and we have to factor it. So I have x squared minus 4x minus 21 over 5x plus 15. And then we are dividing by x squared plus 3x minus 70 over x squared minus 100. And same thing, I can write this as a fraction and a fraction, so it could appear like this. Oh gosh. Sorry, give me a second to write this down. Right, so these are identical things. So we're still dividing the two fractions. They look differently. I don't know which one you're most comfortable with. I guess I'm not used to the division sign, so I would prefer this one, just so I could see clearly that I'm multiplying by the reciprocal, because that's an operation that I'm like used to doing. I'm not really used to like, oh, you just flip the second fraction. That doesn't necessarily make sense in my mind. But I want to say, if you're doing problems in your textbook, they set them up in the first way, so with the division sign and not the double fraction thing. But you'll see the double fraction when you get to pre-calc and everything, so you should recognize both ways. But they still represent the same thing. So when you did the last section, when I asked you guys if you knew how to do the AC method, most of you said yes. So I'm going to breeze right by through factoring since you guys told me that you already know how to do it. So the first one, x squared minus 4x minus 21, you always ask yourself what multiplies to c but adds to b. So my c value is negative 21, b is negative 4, and so those numbers are 7 and 3, and specifically 7 has to be negative to add to negative 4. So then my numerator is x minus 7, x plus 3. And then my denominator, I'm going to move to 5x plus 15. I could take 5 out since I don't have a quadratic. I could factor out what's in common, and I have x plus 3 left over. And factor in the second part. So x squared plus 3x minus 70, the c value is negative 70, b value is 3, so I need 10 and 7. 7 has to be negative for it to add to positive 3, so 10 minus 7 is 3. So then I have x plus 10, x minus 7, and then the denominator is a difference of squares. So x squared minus 100, you could think of it like what multiplies to negative 100 but then adds to 0 since you don't have an x value, and it's 10 and negative 10. If you don't want to factor it, just think of a difference of squares. You square root all of it, and then you have plus or minus for each binomial. So now it's all factored, so factoring first is done. I want to flip the second fraction, so the first fraction stays exactly the same. And then the second fraction flips around and it changed to multiplication since I flipped it, since I'm like multiplying by the reciprocal now. Okay, so now I could go and start like dividing out what's in common, or I can think of it as canceling. I don't really care what you do as long as you're not being like cancel happy. But I see I have an x plus 3 and x plus 3 in both numerator and denominator, so those will divide out. Same thing with this x minus 7 in the first fraction. There's an x minus 7 in the second fraction's denominator, so that cancels. And I have an x plus 10 in top and bottom as well. So most everything canceled. I just have left x minus 10 over 5, it looks like. And at that point in time, I can't simplify this anymore since I have a binomial in the numerator and a monomial in the denominator. None of this cancels. I probably will see some of you say this could simplify to be x minus 2 because you want to divide the negative 10 and 5, which isn't possible because there's not a 5 in every single term that you can divide out of this. There's only a 5 in 2 of the terms, since there's not a 5 with x. So don't do this. This is not right. Okay, so I need to stop at x minus 10 over 5. So that's how you do that problem. Let's do another one. So I have 3x squared plus 13x minus 10 over 6x squared. And then it says we're dividing 3x squared minus 2x. All right, so same thing. I could write it. Sorry, I just want to show you both ways so that we're familiar with it as this, and then over 3x squared minus 2x. Right, so then we're still doing the same thing, multiply by the reciprocal. So in this case, your second fraction, you don't have a fraction, but you can write it as a fraction, so putting a placeholder of 1 in the denominator so you can clearly see what you're flipping around. But I should first factor before I get carried away here. So I need to factor. Let's start with the 3x squared plus 13x minus 10. So said I have to do the full AC method. So, oh my word. 3 times 10 is, or negative 10 is negative 30. My b value is 13, so, okay, so my initial thought was 10 and 3, because 10 and 3 make 13, but it needs to multiply by negative 30, so it had to be either negative 10 and 3 or 10 and negative 3, which then these add to negative 7 or positive 7, so these actually don't work. So there has to be another option. So my next option is 15 and 2. Are the numbers that actually work in this case, because I can make 2 negative. So then I do multiply to be negative 30, but I add a positive 13. All right, so full AC method. We have to rewrite it into 4 terms using 15x to rewrite the 13x. And then remember, cut it in half, 3x, and then I take out, or I have left x plus 5. Take out a negative 2, I have x plus 5 left over. And then 3x minus 2 is what's in front of the parentheses, and x plus 5 is what's inside parentheses. Okay, so my numerator is 3x minus 2 times x plus 5. My denominator is 6x squared. And then I'm still dividing by this thing over 1, which I want to factor out what's in common since I don't have a c value. I could take an x out, and then I'll have 3x minus 2 left over. Okay, so everything's factored. The second step is multiplying by the reciprocal. So I'm going to have my first fraction remain intact. Nothing's changing with it. but my second fraction flips around, so it's 1 over x times 3x minus 2. Okay, so now I can divide out what's in common. So I can see I have a 3x minus 2 in both the top and the bottom, so those cancel, they divide out. And then my numerator, all I have is x plus 5, which there's no x plus 5 in the denominator, so it doesn't cancel. So my numerator is just x plus 5. My denominator, I have 6x squared and an x. I'm just going to multiply those two things together and make it 6x to the third. So right now, this is as simplified as I can go. I can't divide an x out of every single term. It's just not possible, so this is just simplified. So that is dividing rational expressions. Very similar to multiplying. Make sure you know how to factor. Flip the fraction and make sure you don't get too cancel happy when you're doing this. Let me know if you have any questions. You still do have a 5-question assignment in Schoology as well.